Then you're going to turn that radio down a little bit.
Good to go, my brother.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. We'll probably have a few more maybe showing up yet. We're missing our those two gentlemen, Dino and Josh. That's right. So, everybody have a good week? Anybody get into hamstudy.org this last week? All right. All right. And you're racing them, right? Oh, yeah? Okay. Good, good. That's what it's all about, right? That's what it's all about. Anybody remember what we talked about last week? You got the notes, don't you? Yeah. I don't remember. We started talking about propagation at the end, didn't we? We're going to continue on propagation today. And we'll get through some good stuff, talk about some antennas, talk about some feed lines, and get into some of the nuts and bolts of amateur radio. So has anybody ever heard of the ionosphere? Okay. Well, the ionosphere is located about 30 to 260 miles above the surface of the Earth. So it's right up there. Right up there.
Quite the range.
That is quite the range. It starts at about 30 and it goes up to about 260 miles. So that's a long ways up there. I got to be 30 miles above the Earth looking down. It's pretty high. So, but that is where the ionosphere is located, and it's a very important part of amateur radio. And we'll talk about why. So it's between 30 and 260 miles above the surface of the Earth. This is where the atmosphere is thin enough for atoms to be ionized by solar ultraviolet radiation. Where do you think that solar ultraviolet radiation comes from? The sun, right, right. So the sun plays a big part on how well we can communicate. And we've got this protective layer around the Earth that protects us from this ultraviolet radiation, but it ionizes all these particles up in the ionosphere. And these ions that are up there, they're electrically conductive. So they conduct electricity. Well, that's a good thing for us. Okay, now there's varying density, and the ionosphere forms layers with different amounts of ionization. Okay, so within this ionosphere, this 30 to 260 miles, there's some different layers within that. And so this ionization, it varies with solar illumination, which means as the sun is up and it's light, it changes. The ionization will change. When it's dark, it changes again because it's not getting any of that radiation coming directly from the sun. So it also changes the way the ham bands work. So some bands work very good during the day. And on HF, you're going to have 20 meters is real good during the day. Not so good at night. 80 meters, it's pretty good at night. Not so good during the day. And so they kind of act a little bit differently depending on whether we've got daylight or nighttime. And I've got a tracking program that I sometimes will use, and it shows what we call the gray line. And it shows the Earth, and it shows where the sun is. It's called the gray line, where the difference between light and dark is as it's coming around the Earth. So as you can as it gets closer to us in the morning, I usually get up, it's still dark 30 when I'm out of bed. And if I happen to go down and look at the radio and I turn on this program on my computer and I see the gray line coming and I'm going, okay, right now I'm still in the dark, I can use 80 meters and make some contacts. And as it gets closer and closer, 80 starts getting worse and worse and worse, and then 20 meters starts picking up. And so that has to do with the ionosphere and how the ionization varies with the light coming from the sun. So higher ionization refracts or bends radio waves more strongly. Okay? So if we've got high ionization, we send a signal up and it hits that ionosphere, well, it'll turn it back down to the Earth. Well, it'll bounce off the Earth and it'll go back up to the ionosphere again. And it can bounce down again. You can get several skips as your signal, and that's how you get long wave propagation. That's how it gets way out there. Is it's bouncing off that ionosphere. So we have different layers in the ionosphere. And as this photo here, or drawing, shows, we've got the stratosphere that's between 6 and 30 miles, and then we get to the ionosphere. The troposphere shows down there below that. But the first layer in the ionosphere is known as the D layer. So, starts with the letter D. It's the D layer, delta layer, okay? And that goes from about 30 to 60 miles in altitude. Then from about 60 to 70 miles, you have the E layer. And within that E layer, you can get a hop. If you have a signal that hits that E layer, you can get a signal out about 1,200 miles. So that's a pretty good jump, right? If you think about it. 1,200 miles and you make a contact. Then you get up above that and you get to the F1 layer, which has a higher concentration in the daytime. And that's where you're going to get your best skips during the day, is in that F1 layer. And then you got that F2 layer above that, and it's more at night. And you take that F1 and F2 and you combine, they kind of combine at night. So instead of an F1 and F2 layer at night, you just have an F layer. The 1 and 2 go away, they just kind of combine as you get to the nighttime. It's going to depend on the band you're on, how much power you're running, and because that'll determine how far your signal is going to get out. So if I'm running something and I'm running 5 watts, it'll get there, but it might not get there as quick, right? Now, depends on what mode you're also operating in. Because some modes really can pick up weak signals, and are known as weak signal mode. We'll talk a little bit about CW, or Morse code. And CW stands for continuous wave. So it's sending out a continuous wave. Now, continuous wave works very well with low power. Randy makes contacts quite a ways away at usually 5 watts. Okay? Now, if you tried to make that same contact using single sideband on voice with 5 watts, what do you think, Randy?
It's not even close.
It's not going to happen, right?
The voice modulates the power, so your output goes up and down. You can get it. The condition's got to be absolutely perfect with nobody else out there trying to make the same power.
Yeah, because people are going to hear those that have the more powerful signals, and they're not going to hear the weak signals as much. A lot of times people will ask to just or low power, or what we call QRP, which is low power transmissions only, and try to hear them. Take away the high powerful ones and try to listen to those weaker signals. And you can sometimes get them, And most of the folks that are operating, they will honor that. If somebody's calling for QRP or low power, and they run a high power, they usually back off and let the low power guys try to get in. Because it's a challenge to run low power.
I talked to a gentleman in New Zealand last week. He was reading on 15 meters, 5 watts, speedometer. And we get on our Wednesday night net, and I can't barely get across St. Paul and talk to Jeff Dickerson at 100 watts.
At 100 watts, yeah.
And that's the difference with straight, talking about ground rate, straight across, or skipping off the atmosphere.
Yeah. So it's it's kind of fun to we don't see it. We don't see it happening. We look up there and go, where's that signal? Where's it bouncing? I can't see it, right? We can't see these radio waves, but we know they're there, and we know that they're bouncing off of those. So we got the BE, F1, and F2 layers in the ionosphere. Now, depending on whether it's night or day and on the intensity of solar radiation, these layers can refract. Usually the E, F1, and F2 layers, or absorb radio waves. And the absorption happens really in the D layer and the E layer. E layer is not going to go as far. I mean, you're going to get 1,200. You can get 1,200 miles on the maximum hop. But that's about it. It's going to absorb a lot of those signals. But if you get through that D and E layer, that's where you're going to get the refraction, and it's going to bounce back down to the Earth. Does that make sense? All right. If I got Rick understanding it, that's a good thing. Okay. So each reflection from the ionosphere is called a hop. So if you hear somebody say, my signal's hopping, well, it's going up to the ionosphere and it's coming right back down. It's hopping. And it can go hundreds or thousands of miles. Okay?
Sometimes it'll skip in the layer.
And sometimes it will skip in the layer. Yeah. Yep. And that's where you can really get some great distance. And the other day I was working and I was a little bored at the same time, so I turned my radio on. And one thing with some digital signals, you can just set it up. It runs with your computer. The radio's talking to the computer. I look over there every once in a while, and if I got something red, I click a button. I can do that, and I can work at the same time. Well, had a guy from Ukraine out there, and I made a digital contact with the fellow from Ukraine. And
5,600 watts.
yeah, it's a long ways away.
I got Ukraine this morning.
So even though they're at war, there's guys out there playing radio. And, probably because they're at war, they're trying to make sure they've got the radio equipment, that it's working. Because when Russia first started invading them, that was the only way they could communicate, was getting out with the radio. All of their communications was blocked. But they were able to get out with the radio. Yeah.
You make a contact with Ukraine. Are they speaking English? Or you're making a voice contact?
These are actually made during a digital contact. So it's my computer. But yeah, they would normally talk English. There are some frequencies that you will hear that they talk different language. There's a couple of frequencies on 20 meters that I hear folks talking usually every morning in Spanish. French and German, they'll have different frequencies that they'll talk in different languages.
One of the ironies with voice communication across cities over in Europe, they speak very good English. I talked to a gentleman in China, in Beijing, a number of years back now, but his English was probably better than mine. So,
Yeah.
When you say you were using or you were making computer contact,
Mm-hmm.
does it come up as text or what kind of communication are you using?
So what it does is it basically sends my signal to him, and he sends back how he's reading my signal. So he'll send back that he's receiving my signal and tell me that he's got the signal. And the computer actually is sending those messages back and forth. So there are some programs that you can do text.
Okay, so all you're really getting is signal strength.
Signal strength,
But you're not getting any, say, how's the weather over there? Or
not on the mode that I was running, but there are modes that you can do that.
Well, you can do that on the WSJTX. There's a chat mode on it.
Yep.
So you can talk.
okay,
The whole purpose with the digital communications is fast. How many can you get?
okay.
And it's all electronic, computer to computer. You know, so it's just fast.
So your computer is going to your radio is going over to his radio, and then to his computer. And
So it's just me.
It is. It is. Now, there's a lot of people that won't have anything to do with digital communications because there's no challenge to it. Once you set up your computers, all you do, like Jeff says, you watch it. When somebody contacts you, his information turns red. You just click on it, and the computer makes the contact and logs it in your book.
Yeah.
Ready for the next one. You know, that being said, I probably got close to 6,000 digital contacts. FP8 is the most digital contacts. I've got more than that on CW and very, very few on voice. I'm not a voice guy. And CW is another one that is universal. Everybody knows CW. No matter what language you have, voice code is the same. So I could send hello, it's the same codes. Okay.
yep. And this afternoon, I was working down the cities today, and I've got my radio set so that I can actually get into my radio via my phone. I can turn it on, I can change the frequencies, and I can listen to what my radio is doing, just over my phone. And so I turned it on, and I was listening, and on 10 meters there was a fellow in the south of France that he was trying to make contacts in the U.S. And he was coming in very strong, and he had very good English. And this was voice. And so, yeah, I didn't make contact with him because I'm sitting there and I've got my employees sitting around me. I had my headphones on. I didn't want them knowing what I was doing. I was working, but I was listening to this rather than listening to something else, you know. And but you can make contacts all over the world, and they do speak English. I was driving down here tonight listening to my radio, and there was a guy out of Japan that was coming across on what they call system fusion, which is a Yaesu. It's a digital format, yeah. And so it's another way, but it's a digital format that you're using voice. Talking with, yep. So it's a radio to the computer through the internet, but you can make long distance contacts. This guy was in Japan, and I've heard him before, and he has very good English as well. So they usually speak English, so makes it easier for us. So I don't have to learn all these other languages. Yeah, it's on my agenda. All right. So, sunspot cycle and activity. Anybody ever hear of these sunspots? Especially lately, right? There's been a lot in the news. I don't know if you've heard about them, but these sunspots, they can have solar flares that happen. And when these solar flares happen, they can do havoc to the radio waves. They can do havoc to the cell phone signals, just depending on how much radiation is coming from the sun. So the radiation from the sun varies with the number of sunspots on the sun's surface. And a high number of sunspots results in high levels of ionization radiation emitted from the sun. So if we get a lot of radiation coming from the sun, it does all kinds of crazy things to our atmosphere. It wasn't too many weeks ago that the northern lights were visible. I didn't happen to see them because I didn't get up at 2 or 3 in the morning to go look at them, but I heard that they were visible around here. And, it usually does not happen that it gets this far south. Usually it's up around the pole, right around the North Pole.
The only information, our sunspot cycle, we're in solar cycle 25 this year, but normally we get about 63 sunspots. We have been recording as high as 143. Now, when you see the high sunspot cycles like this, as Jeff said, it ionizes the atmosphere. That is prime time for amateur radio. The more sunspots, the better. Solar flares are a different thing.
Solar flares are different.
Yeah. Sunspots, absolutely fantastic for amateur.
Yep, because it gets that atmosphere ionized, and we've got a lot of ionization. That's perfect for amateur radio. When you get a solar flare, it sends out a burst of radiation, and that's where it can come right through the atmosphere and just doesn't do good things to radios. So the sunspot activity follows an 11-year cycle. So every 11 years it goes in a cycle, okay, between high and low. And right now we are at a high level in that cycle. And over the next few years it'll start petering off. And then after a while it's going to start coming back up. So every 11 years we'll have a high sunspot activity.
For us, sunspots get us up on the upper band, 10 meters. Usually we can't talk on a low sunspot cycle. 10 meters doesn't work very well. 15 meters is even up. 6 meters is non-existent. High sunspots, high level like this, you can talk on bands you seldom can. So really exciting times right now.
Yep. And as I said, I was listening to a guy out of the south of France today. He was on 10 meters. And he was coming through just like he was sitting in the next room. And he was running, I think he said he was running 200 watts into his antenna. And there were guys reaching him with 100 watts coming the other direction. So
We're at a fairly high point now. How long will this stay high before it starts dropping off?
I'm not exactly sure where we are in the cycle. We're probably 2 or 3 years into it, so it'll be up for a while.
That's not something long back, 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah. We're just newly into it.
yeah, so now is a great time to get your license.
Oh,
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
oh, yeah.
Yes, you have time. Yes.
That being said, once you get the test license, you start on into the general. That gives you the HF.
Yep. You will have some privileges in 10 meter as a tech. So you'll be able to make contacts on 10 meter. And it's a good time to do that. But we're going to want to be able to also make contacts on 20 meters and 40 meters and all the other bands as well.
It will help you.
10 meters to 12 meters. If it's open.
Yep. So the air flares, they can reflect 6 meters, which is our 50 megahertz signals when we're at the sunspot's peak, which you're not going to have when we're at a low sunspot activity. So 6 meters is another one. That's known as the magic band because it's magic. It opens and it closes. And quickly. So I've still got to build me a 6 meter antenna, which I do not.
I know, guy.
I know you do. Good. All right. So patches of E layer can become sufficiently ionized to reflect VHF and UHF signals. This is called sporadic E. And these are most common during early summer and midwinter months on 10, 6, and occasionally 2 meters. Okay? So the E layer, normally we don't get a lot of ionization, but it can become ionized, which results in that sporadic E bouncing, which is pretty cool. It'll reflect the VHF and UHF signals. Because if you think about what we talked about, I think maybe our first week here, when we were talking about radio waves, VHF and UHF signals, normally they're all line of sight. And they're going to go out, well, they're not going to follow the curvature of the Earth. They're going to keep going straight. They're going to go out to the ionosphere. Well, they're going to keep going right through it. Okay, they're not going to bounce off of it. But when the conditions are just right, and there's enough ionization, they can bounce off the E layer, and that ends up being called the sporadic E. Okay. So the ionosphere, also known as a RF mirror, a radio frequency mirror. And so the thing that we want is the right range of frequencies to be refracted back to the Earth. Those that are refracted, like my mouse going, this one here comes up and it refracts back down here and goes over to this guy over here. And he must be over there in Italy or something. No, Italy's down a little bit, so he must be in Germany. This guy, well, he's going right up here and it's just getting absorbed. There's nothing happening to him. This one, well, he's shooting for Mars. He's going to try to do a Mars to Earth shot. Not going to happen. Okay? So the ionosphere can refract radio waves back to Earth, and it acts like a reflection. So it's like a mirror. You see a reflection in there, it's coming back to you, right? It's kind of how the ionosphere acts. It goes up there and it just kind of brings it back down. And most of the refraction occurs in the F layer. And the reflection depends on the frequency and the angle of incidence. So we'll talk about angle of incidence as we talk a little bit more about antennas. But it's basically what angle is your signal leaving your antenna. So antennas, and we'll talk about polarization. Some are horizontally polarized, some of them are vertically polarized, and makes a difference on how the signal is leaving the antenna. Too high of a frequency or an angle, and the rays are lost to space. So, Yoda might hear that signal sometime. Oh, he was long ago, right? Galaxy far, far away in the past, or maybe it's Captain Kirk that's in the future. Okay. So the highest frequency signal that can be reflected back to a point on Earth between the transmitter and the receiver is the maximum usable frequency. So when you're thinking about your radio frequencies, if you keep changing frequency and you keep turning frequency up, what's that maximum frequency that's not going to go right through the ionosphere? When you get to that point and you're still getting it reflected back to the Earth, that's your maximum usable frequency if it can't go any higher and have it reflected back. So skywave or skip propagation is responsible for most over-the-horizon propagations on HF and low VHF, the 10 and the 6 meters, during peaks of the sun cycle, of the sunspot cycle. So when we're talking about skywave or skip, that's what's going up and bouncing back down. It's like skipping a rock, but we're skipping it off of the ionosphere and it's coming back. Okay? And skip is very rare on the 144 megahertz, which is the 2 meter band, and higher UHF bands, 70 centimeters. Usually you just don't see it. It's very rare. Now the E region of the ionosphere is also home to meteor trails. So meteors are coming, cruising past the Earth, and they leave a trail behind them. Ends up in the E region. And bouncing signal off of these ionized trails is called meteor scatter propagation. So you can actually bounce a signal off a meteor trail. And the best band for this is 6 meters. And when you're doing this, it can go 1,200 to 1,500 miles away, bouncing it off of a meteor scatter propagation. I like that. You can take notes and not even look at the paper. I like that. That's talent. Okay. Let's have a few practice questions and see where we're at. So which region of the atmosphere can reflect or bend HF and VHF radio waves? C, the ionosphere. That is correct. Okay. Why are simplex UHF signals rarely heard beyond the radio horizon? They're too weak to go very far. FCC regulation prohibits them from going more than 50 miles. UHF signals are usually not propagated by the ionosphere, and UHF signals are absorbed by the ionospheric D region. What do you think? Any ideas? C? It is C. They're not propagated by the ionosphere. They'll go through it. What is a characteristic of HF communication compared with communication on the VHF and higher frequencies? HF antennas are generally smaller. HF accommodates wider bandwidth signals. Long-distance ionospheric propagation is far more common on HF. There's less atmospheric interference, static on HF.
D.
C is correct. D, there is more static on HF than there is on VHF, UHF. So that one you can just eliminate right away because there's always more static on HF. Okay, what is a characteristic of VHF signals received via auroral backscatter? And this was not in the slide, so we'll kind of maybe have to figure this one out. They're often received from 10,000 miles or more. They are distorted and the signal strength varies considerably. They occur only during winter nighttime hours. And they are generally strongest when your antenna is aimed west. Okay, we're here in B. Let's take a look. It is B, yep. They are distorted and signal strength varies considerably when we have auroral backscatter. All right, which of the following types of propagation is most commonly associated with occasional strong signals on the 10, 6, and 2 meter bands from beyond the radio horizon? B, is that what I'm hearing? It is B, sporadic E. And what band is best suited for communicating via meteor scatter? 6 meters, yes, that is correct. And what is generally the best time for long-distance 10-meter band propagation via the F region? Okay, so we're going up into the F region. That's where we usually get the reflection, right? So is it from dawn to shortly after sunset during periods of high sunspot activity, or from shortly after sunset to dawn during periods of high sunspot activity, or from dawn to shortly after sunset during low sunspot activity, or shortly after sunset to dawn during periods of low sunspot activity? A? Yeah, it's during the day, right? And it's in high sunspot activity. That would be A. So you get 10 meters, 20 meters, they're good during the day. 40 meters, can do a little bit of both, but you get above 40 meters, and that's nighttime. And so 10 meters is going to be mainly during the day. Okay, which of the following bands may provide long-distance communication via the ionosphere's F region during the peak of the sunspot cycle? What do you think? A? It is A. Exactly. Okay. So let's move on now a little bit into antenna and radio wave basics. So we're going to talk about some important things. You can have a radio. You can have your radio sitting on your desk or in your car. If you don't have a good antenna, it's not going to do anything, is it? And you don't want to push the talk button if you don't have an antenna on your radio. Okay? That's an easy way to have smoke. Don't want to smoke your radio. Okay. So what is in that antenna system? You have your antenna. And this is what transforms the current into radio waves to transmit and vice versa when you receive. You have your feed line that's going to connect your radio with your antenna. And then you're going to have some test and matching equipment that allows you to monitor and to optimize your system performance. So that's always important. Whenever we set up a new radio or a new antenna with a radio, we always like to test that antenna to make sure that it's properly functioning. Because if it's not, it can be damaging to your radio. So that test equipment, that's an important thing to use to make sure that your antenna is in sync with your radio, that it's got a good match. Okay? So for an antenna to do that job efficiently, its dimensions must be an appreciable fraction of the signal's wavelength. So if you think about antennas, they're trying to get a signal out, and you got different wavelengths. Remember when we talked about all these wavelengths, and they were short and they were long? And well, antennas, whether it is a vertical antenna or a wire antenna, it needs to be an appreciable fraction of the wavelength that you want to send out in your signal. If you want to send something out in 20 meters, you're in the 14 megahertz frequency range, right? And it's got a certain wavelength. And so you need to be within a fraction of that wavelength. It can be the full wavelength, 100% of that wavelength, or it could be a half of that, it could be a quarter of that. Half is known as a half wave, and a quarter is known as a quarter wave. Okay? So you got to have it to match in those types of situations. Now, they've got some ways that you can make antennas that aren't exactly that long match up, and these are called, a lot of times you'll see these on verticals, and they're called traps, where you've got some coils in there that kind of shorten that length down, so it doesn't have to be so long. Because if you had a vertical antenna at a full 20-meter wavelength, you could be 20 meters, or 20 times 20 meters, which is about 3, a meter is what, 3 feet, or close to it? It's like a yard, close to a yard. It's a little bit different, but it's close. So 20 times 3, you're going to be at 60 feet for a 20-meter. It's quite a tall antenna. Now I've got an antenna in my backyard that will cover 10 meters, 20 meters, 15 meters, 20 meters, 40 meters, and it's about 20 feet long. But it's got traps to bring it to match with the different bands. Okay, so it has to be a fraction of that signal's wavelength in order to do that job efficiently. So the radio wave is an electromagnetic wave, and it contains both electrical and magnetic energy or fields created by the RF current. So we've got this RF current, it's got electromagnetic wave in that, and it's this electric and magnetic fields. So the electric and magnetic fields are at right angles with each other, and they oscillate at the same frequency as the RF current in the antenna. So you've got these fields, electric and magnetic, at right angles to each other, and they're going at the same frequency as the RF current that's in the antenna. So some vocabulary as we talk about antennas. Element. So the conducting part or parts of an antenna designed to radiate or receive radio waves. We got a Yagi handy? It's easier to demonstrate with an actual antenna. So we've got an antenna in the back, and we'll cover the different parts of this antenna. Yes, sir.
If anyone's interested, my vocabulary won't show up on here when you work from the antennas. We're more than happy to pass it on when it don't work.
Okay, so this is what's known as a Yagi antenna. And these, you see the cross numbers, the small ones, right? Those are our elements. Okay? The part that Randy's holding, that is known as the beam.
Anybody gather a guess how this is polarized, vertical or horizontal?
The radio is holding it right now. Would it be vertical or horizontally polarized? What do you think? Vertical, yeah. Your elements are going up and down. Now, so just turn that 90 degrees, change the polarity of that antenna. Okay?
This one is like that. Whichever way you point, when you talk. All the elements push the signal in one direction.
Very direct.
As opposed to an omnidirectional.
Now with a Yagi antenna, you have a driven element.
The driven one on this one, right here. You'll see this little connector here, called the SO239. And we'll learn all through it. You collect screws onto this. How is this one? The longer antenna in the back, it collects the signal. In the front, these are directors. Driven reflector.
Yep. So the driven element.
Look. It's a little bit smaller as you go. Each one's a little bit smaller.
Yep.
That is a VHF.
All right. So an array is an antenna with more than one element. Well, how many elements do that have? That had about 7 on it. So that would be an array. And a parasitic element, elements that are not connected directly to a feed line. Okay, these would be the ones that Randy talked as directors, because they're not directly connected to that feed line. There was only the driven element that was connected to the feed line. And resonant. An antenna is resonant when its feed point impedance has zero reactance. Okay? So remember we talked about reactance and resonance a couple of weeks ago? And there's another antenna. That is a quarter wave 2 meter. So 2 meters is about 6 feet. And that's about a quarter of that 6 feet.
That's called a magma. A magnet on it, stick it on the roof or the hood of your car. And you should go.
Okay.
Oh, is that one omnidirectional?
That is on
That would be omnidirectional, yes.
We use people all the way around.
So the feed point is where the transmitter energy enters the antenna. So on this one, the feed point's going to be down at the bottom where that coax is coming into the antenna. Okay? The feed point's not going to be where the connector is that you're connecting to your radio. It's right at the antenna. Okay? And radiation. Now this is something to remember. It's not radioactivity. It's radiation. And it's not the radiation that you would get if we dropped an atomic bomb. Okay? It's not that kind of radiation. This is the antenna emitting those electromagnetic waves. So it's known as, the signal is radiating. It's getting out. You think of radiating, if you ever had one of those radiator heaters where it just kind of radiates that heat rather than forced air that you get from your central air conditioning and your central furnace, that it radiates the heat. That's the kind of thing that this is comparable, right? Your electrical magnetic waves are radiating out from your antenna. All right, so electromagnetic waves radio waves are electromagnetic waves. And the electric and magnetic fields are at right angles to each other, oscillating at the wave's frequency. And they spread out into space from the antenna. So this one is going to radiate in every direction, okay? The Yagi antenna is going to radiate basically in one direction. You can get a little bit off the sides, but it's mainly going to radiate in the direction of the antenna. You can actually get some on the back side, but it's a directional antenna, so generally your radiations is going to go in one direction. And it's created by AC current. And the wave and current have the same frequency. Okay, so Randy was talking about polarization. So it refers to the orientation of the radio wave's electric field. Vertical or horizontal is determined by the elements. So the elements, whether they're going this way, right, or if they're going this way, determines whether it's vertical or horizontal. And it can be circular if the orientation twists as the wave spreads through space. And combinations of polarization are called elliptical polarization, where you get both horizontal and vertical antennas. They're effective for receiving and transmitting on the HF bands, where skip propagation is very common. Okay, so when the polarizations of transmit and receive antennas aren't the same, they're not aligned the same, the received signal can be dramatically reduced. So you get less current created in the antenna. So if you have the antenna set so that it's vertical, and I'm sending a signal off of my vertically polarized antenna, and I'm sending it over to Rick. And his antenna is horizontally polarized. He's got it the other direction. You know, Rick always wants to be different. So he's got his horizontally polarized, mine's vertical. Well, I'm going to be sending that signal, and he's getting just a little piece of it. The rest of it's going right on by his antenna because it's not polarized in the same direction. Now, recently, we have a net that we do on Friday evenings. We call it our Deuce. It's a 2-meter net, and that's 2-meter upper sideband. We're going to talk about sidebands in a little bit. But we had, I think the first night that we had one of our members had a horizontally polarized antenna. And the rest of us were vertically polarized. And this member, he was saying, well, I'm not hearing y'all that good. Are you hearing me? We could hear him, but not as good as the next week when he turned his antenna the other way. Then we were hearing him very good. We were all polarized the same direction, and we could pick up his signal a lot better than when it was polarized differently. So it makes a big difference if your antennas are polarized in the same direction. Okay, so antenna and wave polarization must match for maximum reception. All right, let's have a few more questions here. What happens when antennas at the opposite ends of a VHF or UHF line of sight radio link are not using the same polarization? What do you think? B, yeah, we just talked about that. Okay, which of the following results from the fact that signals propagated by the ionosphere are elliptically polarized?
B.
B. Either vertically or horizontally polarized antennas may be used for transmission or reception. And that is very true. I've got 2 antennas that I use for HF at my place, and I know Randy's got a couple as well. One of them's vertical, okay? That's the one that's 20 feet tall at my place. I have another one that's 135 feet. It's a wire. It goes up from my deck to a tree, back over to my house, okay? It's horizontally polarized, okay? This wire is. Now, I can use both of these antennas most of the time, except my wire antenna right now has got a problem and I've got to get fixed. But normally, I can use both of these antennas, and I can make contacts all over the place with both of them. Sometimes one might work a little bit better than the other, but they both make contacts on HF, whether it's vertical or horizontal. Okay? Any questions?
Is there a way for you to use both doing it at the same time?
No.
If you had a second radio, then you could start having conflicts. I haven't got to that yet.
I haven't got to that yet, but yes, you would have conflicts. And a couple times a year we have field day competitions that we come down to the club and try to make as many contacts as you can over a 24-hour period. Okay, so we operate the radios 24 hours. And what we find is that if we've got Randy out on that radio and we've got Rick on that radio trying to transmit at the same time, they're just bouncing off of each other. And, Rick's here and Randy's here and Rick, and they're not hearing the guys out in the field. So you get that, if you're too close, you get interference with your own antennas. So there's ways to get around that with some filters, but if you don't have the filters, then you really have problems with that. All right, so what is the relationship between the electric and magnetic fields of an electromagnetic wave? Did I hear B? D? D is the right answer. They are at right angles. Okay. What property of radio wave defines its polarization? Now, is it the orientation of the electric field, the orientation of the magnetic field, The ratio of energy in the magnetic field let's forget about that one. Don't even worry about that one. The ratio of the velocity, don't worry about that one either. Here are the first two. Either magnetic or electric field. Okay, I'm hearing A and B. Here we go. It's A. That's the electric field. Okay. So polarization has to do with the electric field. All right, what are the two components of a radio wave? C, the electric and the magnetic fields. Yes, that is correct. All right, some vocabulary in terms of the antenna. Gain. So gain is apparent increase in power in a particular direction by focusing radiation in that direction. It's measured in decibels. So gain is good, okay? I think of it this way. If I want to gain something, that's a good thing, right? So if we get more power going out in a particular direction, that is known as gain. And we measure that in decibels. Isotropic is equal radiation in all directions. So, as in this antenna here, isotropic radiation, it's going out equally in all directions. And omnidirectional is no preferred horizontal direction. So this antenna doesn't care, where it's going. It's omnidirectional. Now, a directional is an antenna that focuses the radiation in specific directions, like the Yagi that we had in here. Okay. And this is a picture of the antenna radiation patterns. So one of them, we're looking at it down. We're looking from the top down on this antenna's signals. And we've got the signal strength coming from the center out. And it's coming out in basically this direction. It's radiating out this way. We see how this is coming around here. Well, we're radiating out here. It's coming out in all these directions, but the main direction is this way. Okay? Now this little piece back here that comes back and down here, that is known as a, Rick, what is that? No. I've got it here somewhere. We'll get to it. It talks about it.
It ain't worth it.
It isn't worth anything. That's a dead zone, basically. Okay, and so this one is an elevation pattern. And so what we're doing here is, where we're looking down on this view, this is up. Okay? And we're looking at it from the side, okay? And this antenna is radiating upward. It's going this direction, it's going this way, and it's going this way. Now this is known as a null. That's a null right there. I just have to look over here and see it. So these different things that are out here, we see how it's coming like this, and like this. These three things are known as lobes. Okay? This is our main lobe right here, heading out in this direction. And this is a side lobe coming off of what we call the top. It's not going to do us any good if we're shooting our signal straight up, is it? We're going to get most of our benefit off of these lobes here and it's coming up here, and it's going to come up here and hit the ionosphere, and it's going to come back down. Okay? So the elevation pattern looks at the antenna from the side to see how well it receives and transmits at different angles. So these are different angles above the horizon. And this one is basically, we're looking down on it as a circle, 0 to 180. So we got 90 degrees of straight up. We got 270 degrees of straight down. Don't want to radiate straight down. We don't want to radiate closer to above the 90 degree, or above the 0. Make sense? You'll see a lot of these types of charts when you're looking to see how well an antenna is supposed to radiate, and they can be very, very helpful. All right. Okay. Okay, so the antenna radiation patterns continued. So the radiation patterns are a way of visualizing the antenna performance. And the further the line is from the center of the graph, the stronger the signal is at that point. And the graphs are calibrated in decibels, notated little b, capital B. And the most common type of radiation pattern is the azimuthal pattern that shows the antenna's gain in horizontal directions around the antenna. Which, if we come back here, it's the one on the left. Okay, that's the most common type that you're going to see. See how it radiates around the antenna. And then an elevation pattern shows the strength of the radiated energy in vertical directions, as if the antenna is viewed from the side. So, as we talk about radiation patterns, there's a vocabulary that goes right along with it. Okay, moles, these have directions of minimum gain. So if we think about those moles, where it was basically you had the coming in, and that point there where it's coming in, that has your minimum gain. That's where that signal is not getting out. Okay, lobes are the regions between the moles, and the main lobe is the lobe with the highest gain. Okay. The side lobe is any lobe other than the main lobe. Now, forward gain is gain in the direction assigned as forward. So if we're pointing our antenna in a certain direction, and it's directionally that way, that's the direction of our gain. That's our forward gain. The azimuth pattern is radiation patterns showing gain in all horizontal directions around the antenna. An elevation pattern, the radiation pattern showing the gain at all vertical angles. And it's often restricted to angles above horizontal. Now, front to back ratio is the ratio of forward gain to gain in the opposite direction. And front to side ratio is the ratio of forward gain to the gain at right angles. Now, I'm going to bring us back to these pictures real quick. Okay. So, this one says it's the main lobe, right? The main lobe should be the one that has the highest gain. This one kind of looks like it's very similar to this one, but this one must not completely touch that line. Just saying. Because they're identifying this as the main lobe, which would mean that these others are side lobes. Okay? Now, this is where the moles are, is right here and right here. It has the minimum gain. This would be a mole right here. Okay? Make sense? Any questions? Okay. All right. Now, decibels is notated dB. And it's pronounced dB. Okay? So a ratio expressed as a power of 10 to make large numbers easier to work with. So we got great big numbers, and we want to make it so it's easier. We deal with it using the powers of 10. So dB equals 10 log is a power ratio, dB 20 log, a voltage ratio, and my wife has put together a pretty good handout for decibels, and I walked out without it tonight. So I will get that for us. I had my supper here. It was a banana. It tells you how much my supper was tonight. Okay, so positive values in dB indicate ratios greater than 1, and negative values of dB are ratios less than 1. Makes sense? Positive is greater than 1, and negative is less than 1. And an antenna gain is discussed in terms of dB. So you're going to hear often when you're talking about an antenna, you want to know what kind of gain has that antenna got. And it's going to have, a lot of times you'll hear, oh, it's a 6 dB gain. And you can compare that with another antenna that might have a 2 or 3 dB gain. Which one do you think is a better antenna? One with 6 or 2? One with 6, right? Yeah. So the higher the number in dB gain, the better your antenna is, the better you're getting your signal out. Okay. So what is antenna gain? The additional power that is added to the transmitter power, additional power that is required in an antenna when transmitting on a higher frequency, the increase in signal strength at a specified direction compared to a reference antenna, or the increase in impedance on received or transmit compared to a reference antenna. What do you think?
C.
Rick says C. He's actually right. Okay. So which decibel value most closely represents a power increase from 5 watts to 10 watts? Now, just got to give you a hint, and this is on the handout that my wife prepared, I'm pretty sure. It's been a while since I've looked at her handout, but I think she covered it. 3 decibels is usually about a 2 times increase. So, just something to consider in this question. So, which decibel value most closely represents a power increase from 5 watts to 10 watts? It would be B, 3. So 3 decibels is about equivalent to doubling your power. Okay. Which decibel value most closely represents a power decrease from 12 watts to 3 watts?
D.
It would be C. Yep. And which decibel value represents a power increase from 20 watts to 200 watts?
Higher electricity bill.
Well, that is true. You're going to have a higher electricity bill doing that. A. 10 decibels. So once I get this handout, it'll make a lot more sense. So, all right, let's take a little bit of a break. I know Rick's battery is about to die. He's got to change that out. And I need to stretch. I don't know about you, but I need to stretch.
on the inside. A lot of us have done that. Of course, we almost did it when we were young. We all started with hand, everyone.
All right. You hit the go button there, Rick? All right. Okay, well, we're going to talk now a little bit about feed lines and SWI. When we talk about feed lines, it's, it's not the line down at McDonald's, okay? It's a different kind of feed line. All right, so the purpose of the feed line is to get the RF power from your station to the antenna. And when we say your station, we're talking about your radio, okay? So we're trying to get the power from the radio to the antenna so that it can radiate the signal out so that somebody else can hear it, okay? Well, in order to do that, we have to have something to go from the radio to the antenna. Now, there are basic types of feed line. A couple of them that are used quite often. One of them is coax, and that's what Randy's bringing in right here. This is coax cable.
50 ohm.
And it's 50 ohm, because that's what our radios love, is 50 ohm. Okay?
If you want.
Do you have any ladder line back there, Randy?
I think we do.
Stupid question.
No question is stupid.
Can you use the coax that the charter communications guy leaves?
No.
And put a different end on it?
No. It's set up for usually 75 ohms and doesn't make our radios happy.
I expect from that because you used it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a fellow, one of the members brought in a nice big roll of that and wanted to use it for his radio, and it's like, you don't want to do that because it just won't make your radio happy, and it can cause damage to your radio. So we've got the coax cable, and then we have the open wire, and it's also called ladder line. And there's a reason it's called ladder line. We might have some back here. Randy's looking. You okay, Randy? We don't want him to trip. Anyway, so it looks like a ladder, and
Grab the whole antenna and just have a piece of it.
oh, okay, well, that works.
This is what's called ladder line. This is a 450 ohm as opposed to
50 ohm. Now, we made a comment that says our radios like 50 ohm feed line. Well, this is 450 ohm. We have to take it through a transformer in order to bring it down to the 50 ohm that our antennas or our radios like. But those are two of the common types of feed line that are used to get power, RF power to the antenna.
Well, if you have to use a transformer to convert or to drop it down,
Mm-hmm.
why would you use that instead of coax?
It can give you a better signal in certain situations with different types of antennas.
What is that, the G5RV?
Yeah. G5LV is a type of antenna that was designed back in the 50s, probably.
Probably. Yeah.
And
Dipole, that would be feed line from the transformer.
yeah.
To the radio.
Yeah. So different kind of antennas like it, and but the most common kind that you're going to have is going to be the coax.
Not that thick.
Not this thick. This is
That LMR?
It's gotta be. Looks like it.
It's great, but it's overkill.
Yeah, this is very thick. You can actually use a little bit thinner coax. It's 50 ohm, but depending on if you're going to use this up on a tower and it's going to stay there for a long time, you could even go with a hard line. So, but it really, there's all kinds of different size of coax that you can get, just depending on what you're going to use it for. If you're going to use it on a portable operation, you don't need this thick of coax. If you have to put an end on it, it's harder to put the ends on it too.
That's good for you. You're gonna run it under the ground. In the winter time, sit on the ground.
Yep.
It's not cheap.
And this is another type of feed line of coax.
That's also a 50 ohm.
But you can see the difference in the size between the two of these, right?
So if you're gonna put an antenna out in your yard and run it into your house, and it was gonna sit there for a long time, which one would you use, or is there not?
It depends on the frequency range. If you're going to use HF, and you're going to run under 100 feet, the most common cable is called the RG8X. It's about this, a little bit thicker
A
than
little thicker than that.
but you can vary it if you want. You know, it just sits out there forever. Using a VHF, UHF, you want to use the heavier cable, you don't have as much loss. All coaxes are lossy.
Okay.
Yeah, so as this next bullet point talks about here, you know, power is lost as heat in the feed line, and it's called loss, and it increases with the frequency. So as you get your frequencies going up for like VHF, UHF, you're going to have more loss. And so as a result, by going to a heavier cable, you have less loss because it's not going to have so much heat dissipating through the bigger cable. Okay.
So I'm probably gonna have a couple of different cables for me.
Yeah. I've got a VHF, UHF that I have up on my roof, and I have a HF out in my backyard, right? I use the same RG8X, and it works fine for both. And I'm not running that long of a run to my roof for the UHF, VHF, so I'm not losing that much. So you just have to look at how long your run is versus, you know, how much are you going to lose in that run.
Generally, don't want to go over 100 feet.
No, you don't want to go over 100 feet.
It's like what?
So,
Hard line.
yeah. I mean, you can get some kind of line that will go over 100 feet and you'll be okay.
No more than that, you need to build a shack out in the back door.
I don't think that's gonna be a problem.
All right, feed lines used with radio frequencies use special materials and construction methods to minimize power being dissipated as heat by feed line loss and to avoid signals leaking in or out. And so this coax here, we'll look at how they're designed. I got some pictures of it here in a couple, but when you cut this open, you'll see what you got in here. You've got some shielding and different things that prevents as much of that loss as possible from going out. So as we talk about vocabulary here, we got the center conductor, which is the central wire. And you look at this, that is right in the center. That's where the central wire is. The dielectric is the insulation surrounding the center conductor. It's followed by a shield, which is braid or foil surrounding dielectric. And then you've got the protective outer plastic coating, okay, the outer shell here. And that's the jacket. And you've got forward reflected power. And that's all that power traveling towards, away from a load such as an antenna. So if I've got my radio here, and my antenna is over there, my forward power is going to be going towards a load such as an antenna. Okay? So it's going to be headed towards the antenna. That's the forward power. The reflected power is going to be coming back at me. Okay? So we've got forward power, we've got reflected power. So we send out power, we're going to get some back, and that's the reflected stuff. Okay, here are some schematics of coax cable. We have the this is a single shielded one. We've got the outer jacket, right? We've got the center conductor right here. It's surrounded by a dielectric, and that's surrounded by a braid. Okay? Now this is a double shielded. It's got the same center conductor. It's got the same dielectric. Well, it's got some foil. It's got a foil shield, which is followed by a braided shield. Okay? Then you have rigid hardline, which you have the inner core, you have a foam dielectric, and then you've got an aluminum outer conductor, and it's also available with a vinyl jacket on it. And then you get some semi-flexible hardline, which has the same center core, it's got dielectric, it's got a corrugated copper shield on it, and then it's got a vinyl jacket on it. So there's different kind of coax, and that all will work with our radio equipment. And it's a matter of really what kind of coax you want, what you're looking at as far as distance that you're going to run. Because you're going to want to look and see how much loss you might have. The single shielded would have more loss than a double shield. And the rigid hardline would have even less loss. But by the same token, your hardline is going to be very expensive compared to your single shielded. So you got to weigh, okay, how much do I want to spend versus how much losses am I willing to accept? So coax cable is the most common feed line that is in use. It's easy to use. I had a piece of coax that got cut in half. It got up against my house and hit a sharp edge and snapped it right in half. And so last night I put on a couple of new ends. Very easy to do. Okay, it's easy to work with. It's easy to run.
Don't ever throw it away.
Don't ever throw it away. That's what I did. Now I have a jumper and I have a nice long piece of coax. So it's easy to use. It carries the radio signal on the surface of the center conductor and the inside surface of the shield. So your radio signal is coming on the outside of the center conductor and it's inside of that shield. So if we looked at where we've got the shield, right? So it's basically on the outside of that center conductor. And it's inside of this shield. So that's in this area here is where that signal is being carried by that coax. Okay, it's not affected by nearby materials either, which is a good thing. Now it does have a higher loss than open wire line at most frequencies. Aha! Perfect. Thank you, Randy. Randy's been back there working.
That's what yours looked like last night.
This is exactly what mine looked like last night. Okay, so this is the braid, and we just pulled this back, okay? Because normally this is wrapped right around here. We just take off the jacket, and we pull this wire back, and we've got this foil on there. See that foil there? And then see that plastic in there? That's the dielectric. And then here's the center. Okay. You want to just pass that around. But that's what you do to them to get them ready to put on connectors. You strip them down like that, and then you can put on the connectors. All right. So coax, for the most part, you have a little bit higher loss than the open wire line at most frequencies. Now, air-insulated hardline has the lowest loss, but it does limit the amount of bending. Okay, that's why they call it hardline. And
I thought we had some hard line that
we got all kinds of stuff in the back room. But it does have, it's the hard line. They call it hard line for a reason. Very, very little flexibility. You have to bend it to get it to go to different directions that you want. So. But it does have the lowest loss, and that's a lot of times what you will run when you're running feed line up a tower. Depending on how high your tower is, you'll run feed line or hard line. We just recently moved a repeater from on top of the Sauk Rapids water tower, and it's fed with hard line. The hard line's still there, and so is the antenna on the top, but we moved some of the equipment out of the bottom.
And nobody needs to know that.
Yeah, we would probably use that site again.
Here you go with Jeff, deep piece of coal.
hard line.
This is what hard line looks like.
That's expensive. Rick can't even afford that. That's $50. I just go to Towers and steal it.
Yep. So that's a little bit different than this. Okay. But if you run it up a tower and it's going to be there for
60 years.
60 years, that's what you want. Otherwise, you're going to be climbing that tower and replacing this other coax on a regular basis compared to your hard line.
Plus, you got more than likely other antennas transmitting.
You do. Yep.
Well, and the difference with the small coax, for example, our 147.05 repeater, it's 1,000 feet up. Okay? And it's running a 7/8 hard line, which is probably a little bit smaller than that. But we've got fairly high power coming out of the radio. Our counter goes up 1,000 feet, we've got about 20 watts. So there's that much loss, even through the best cable we can buy. If we use the thinner cable, we wouldn't get any power up to the top of that.
Yeah. You just wouldn't get any power up there, and your antenna would be completely worthless at the top. All right. Makes sense? Okay. So this is open wire line or ladder line. They're also known as window line. And it's got two conductors, okay? One on each side. It's lighter and it's less expensive than coax. Has lower loss than coax at most frequencies. So this is one of the reasons if you wanted to have lower loss. It's more difficult to use since it's affected by nearby materials. So if you've got some metal nearby, it's going to be affected by it. Okay, so you've got to make sure that it's not leaning up against a metal structure, or you're going to have all kinds of problems. So it's got to be isolated. And it requires impedance matching equipment to use with most transceivers, because you're taking it from, the twin lead here at 300 ohms and the window line at 450 ohms. You got to bring that down to, 50 ohm match to make your radio happy. So it's got to come through a matching device like a transformer to bring that down. Now those transformers, it can be a 9-to-1 for ladder line easily. We'll bring it down easily for that. And you can build them. They're very easy to build. And you take some tow rods and you wrap some magnet wire around them. And certain number of turns. You just have to follow the directions. An open wire feed lines cannot be buried or installed in metal conduits and must be kept clear of nearby conducting surfaces. Okay, characteristic impedance. So the impedance presented to a wave traveling through a feed line is characteristic impedance. It's given in ohms and the symbol as Z0. It depends on how the feed line is constructed and what materials are used, whether it be coax, 50 or 75 ohm, and
Open window line.
the open window line. Now, Randy, the coax for cable TV,
75.
it's 75, that's what I was thinking. So you really don't want to use that.
Well, you can match it. You can match it now, but it's not as efficient. It takes a pretty good transformer.
Yeah. So that would be, if you have some, it could be used, but you're going to lose in that transition,
Even with the transformer.
even with the transformer, yeah. So you're better off, if you're going to use coax, to use 50 ohm coax. And most coax cable used in ham radio has a characteristic impedance of 50 ohms. Now, standing wave ratio, you're going to hear this over and over and over again, SWR. And this is an important piece of when we're dealing with antennas, is the SWR, standing wave ratio. So if the antenna feed point or the feed line impedances are not identical, you're going to have some RF power reflected back towards the transmitter. And this is called a mismatch. Period and reflective waves create a pattern of standing waves of voltage and current in the line. So an SWR is the ratio of the standing wave max to min. So if we've got a standing wave out there, we've got a maximum on that standing wave and we've got a minimum. What's the ratio? Okay. So it's measured with an SWR meter or SWR bridge. And the reflected power is reflected at the transmitter and bounces back and forth. And you get some heat loss, some power lost as heat with each trip that it's going back and forth along that feed line. And all RF power is eventually lost as heat or transferred to the antenna load. So you want that power to go to your antenna, which is basically your load. You want 100% of it to go there. Well, usually it's not going to get there, but you want as much of that to go as you can. Now, if you've got a standing wave ratio of 1 to 1, it's getting there. Now, if you have a standing wave ratio where you've got 2 coming back against a minimum of 1, it's not all getting to your antenna, and you're losing some of it. Okay? If you've got a 10 to 1, you're getting way too much back. Okay? Most of the modern transceivers now can handle a SWR of about 3 to 1 at the outside, but you don't want to be outside of that. And so this is where having an SWR meter comes into play, so that you can make sure that your antenna is in tune. It doesn't tune the antenna, but it shows you where you're at as far as resonance. And you want it as close to that 1-to-1 as you can get it. Now external tuners will bring it down and make a match, but you're going to lose a lot of your ability to get your power to the antenna. So a high SWR means more reflection and more loss of RF power and less transferred to the antenna. Okay, so if a 10-to-1, that's a high SWR. A 1-to-1 is a low SWR. Okay. So the SWR equals the ratio of the feed point or load and the feed line impedance, whichever is greater than 1. So SWR is always greater than 1-to-1. 1-to-1 is perfect. Okay. So it's always greater than 1-to-1, unless you can get it 1-to-1. That's what you want. But normally it's going to be, 2-to-1 is normal. And modern radio slower transmitter out. Okay, so what will happen is if your transmitter is looking at it and seeing, oh, I've got a high SWR, it's going to reduce its power. Modern ones will. And it's a protection that radio has to keep it from smoking. Okay, it's going to reduce its power if it sees a high SWR. And Rick's still been able to get him to smoke.
You're going to start out smoking in your house. Anyway.
It was just his radio. So if you got an SWR above 2-to-1, the best thing to do is to adjust your antenna so that in your feed line so that it is less than that. And if you get above 3-to-1, it's considered high in most cases. And you'll see that I've seen high SWR by accident on my radio, and they'll come back and tell me I've got a high SWR if I haven't turned my switch to the right antenna. You always want to make sure that switch is turned before you transmit.
Keep it up and maybe you'll hear that.
I know. I see that and it's immediately stop. Okay. So erratic SWR readings may indicate a faulty feed line. It can be a faulty feed line connector, or it could be a faulty antenna. So there's basically 3 places that you can go look. You look at your connections first. Are your connections tight? Is your feed line good? You can test your feed line with one of these meters. Or do I have a bad antenna? And so if you've got SWR readings that are all over the board, that's usually an indication that something is not right in the system. I've got that problem with my wire antenna right now. It's all over the board when I put it on my SWR meter. It's like I've got something wrong. So I've got to check a few different places. I've got to check the antenna, I've got to check the feed line, and I've got to check the connectors. And I guarantee it's going to be one of those 3. I just don't know which one yet. And that's part of the fun, that detective work to see where the problem is.
That's fun.
Especially with 15 inches of snow.
Yeah.
Yes, he knocked that one off. I don't want 30-mile-an-hour winds. Yeah. Well, that's why I'm operating off of my vertical right now, and that might be the case until spring. We'll see. We'll have some good days yet ahead of us. I'm confident of that. All right. So high SWR can be corrected by tuning or adjusting the antenna with impedance matching equipment at the transmitter. So this is with an external tuner. You can bring it down. And this is called an antenna tuner or a transmatch. And it doesn't really tune the antenna. The antenna doesn't change, okay? It's just changing the impedance so that it matches with your radio. To make your radio happy.
Protect your radio.
It protects your radio, and that's what it's doing. And a lot of your modern radios will have an internal tuner right in them that will help to make that match. So it does not change the SWR in the feed line, okay? But
You're
it,
still losing power.
Yeah.
yes, and you could be losing more power as it comes through that. But it is making your radio happy, and you're not getting the best efficient signal going to your antenna.
And it's most important, the lower power you run, the more important the good SWR is. 100 watts, you can run with a 2-to-1. When you get down to the QRP levels, 5 watts, if you got a high match, you lose all your output.
And you won't get any signal out of your antenna.
You're just
Sitting in the wind.
All right. Well, let's go through a few practice questions here. So, what happens to power lost in a feed line? C, it's converted to heat. That is correct. What is the most common impedance of coax cable used in amateur radio? B, 50 ohms. That is right. Why is coax cable the most common feed line for amateur radio antenna systems? It is A. It's easy to use and requires few special installation considerations. It is the easiest type of feed line to use. What happens is frequency of a signal in coax cable is increased. So as we increase our frequency, D, the loss increases. That is right. That's why if we're going to VHF or UHF, we have more loss on that coax cable. Which type of the following feed lines has the lowest loss at VHF, UHF? C. Yes, air insulated hardline. That right there, yeah. Okay, which of the following should be considered when selecting an accessory SWR meter? The frequency and power level at which the measurements will be made, the distance that the meter will be located from the antenna, the types of modulation being used at the station. What do you think? A. Yep. What frequency are you going to be using? What power level will you be taking the measurements at? Yeah. What reading on an SWR meter indicates a perfect impedance match between the antenna and the feed line? C. 1-to-1. Absolutely. Why do most solid-state transmitters reduce output power as SWR increases beyond a certain level? Yeah, it is A, to prevent the output amplifier transistors. And what does an SWR reading of 4-to-1 indicate? Oh. B, yeah.
Impending smoke signal.
Impending smoke signal, yeah. Now, what is a benefit of a low SWR? Reduce signal loss. That is correct. Reduce television interference. Okay. What can cause erratic changes in SWR? B. Loose connection in the antenna or feed line. Absolutely. And what is standing wave ratio, SWR? What do you think?
A.
A, yeah, A is correct. Okay. Well, next week we are going to hit some practical antennas. And then we're gonna get into section 5 next week, which is modulation, transmitters and receivers, digital communications, power supplies and batteries. So some more of